Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Lupe, and I'm the managing editor here at Young Adulting Review. Today, I have the honor of chatting with Heather Fawcett, the Sunday Times and internationally bestselling author of books for adults and children, including her recent novel, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Thank you so much, Heather, for taking the time to answer some questions with me today. I am beyond excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this. Like I mentioned in my email, I went to UBC, so it's very cool to be taking part in a UBC student-led initiative like this.
Yeah, it's amazing. I didn't realize you were from UBC until you told me, and I was like, amazing.
Very
Fantastic.
cool.
So our first question is, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your journey to publishing?
Yeah, for sure. So, I my first novel was Even the Darkest Stars, which is a YA fantasy mountaineering adventure. And after that, I've written, okay, so there's two YA novels, and then after that, I wrote five middle grade novels, and I've now moved into adult. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies is the first book in a series. The next book is coming out next January. So my journey to publication, I started off writing actually when I was 14 years old. That was when I wrote my first novel, and I actually tried to get publishers interested in it. I think I sent it off to like five or six different publishers, because that was back in the day when it was easier to get a publisher without an agent. And I wrote several novels after that. So I've actually been writing for a fairly long time, and now I'm writing full time and from my home on Vancouver Island.
That's fantastic. What a fantastic journey you've had. And as you said, you're a UBC alum and you've earned a master's in English literature and a bachelor's in archaeology, which I think is just so cool. And I wondered how you find that your educational background kind of finds its way into your writing process today.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that particularly with Emily Wilde, it was more relevant. Emily Wilde is very much an academic novel. We pitched it as light academia,
Mhm.
which I think is a fair characterization. So I think that even just kind of having that sort of experience in academia, and also even just things like department politics and just kind of interactions between professors, just having that kind of baseline level of familiarity really helped in terms of crafting this world and the characters, and also just who they are and how they engage with the world. But I think that in terms of archaeology, and having had that experience of doing field work myself, obviously I wasn't hunting for fairies, but I was, I did have a summer where I worked at Pompeii in Italy, and I did some other work. I volunteered for my university museum. I actually did my bachelor's at SFU. So yeah, I volunteered for their museum there and did some other things. So having had that experience of kind of taking sort of a methodological and a systematic approach to field work and to that kind of academic endeavor definitely informed Emily's approach to dryadology, which is this made up discipline which just basically means the study of fairies and the study of folklore. So yeah, I think that that kind of informed the book in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I loved the way the fiction and the academia was kind of like interspersed. I'd never seen footnotes in a fiction novel before, and it was just
Right.
my little academic heart was just like so happy.
Well, if you enjoyed that, I would highly recommend Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark.
Okay.
She wrote Piranesi, which is like I think her most recent novel, which other people might be familiar with. But yeah, she is also a big fan of footnotes.
Okay.
So that was part of the inspiration for Emily Wilde, was her kind of take on that kind of academic structure.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll have to write that down later because I'm all over the footnotes. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
you won't regret it.
So the next question is, I have always been a huge folklore fairy tale fan. So when I realized Emily Wilde took place in an alternate history when fair folk exist, I was beyond excited. Can you tell us a bit about your world building process? And did you have any specific fairy tales or folklore that you drew from?
Right. So yeah, so the book it is set in a made up country. It's set in the country of Leosland, which is kind of situated just off the coast of Norway. It shares a similar latitude with Iceland and a similar geography, and but it's closer in size to the Faroe Islands.
Mm.
So my research really was heavily invested in Scandinavian folklore. So I read a lot of Icelandic myths. I read a lot of Norwegian myths, and also just researching the kind of geography of those places to kind of make sure that Leosland felt like it was something that would feel authentic to that part of the world, but while still allowing myself a decent amount of artistic freedom, which you get if you can just make up a country rather than setting your book somewhere real. So that was nice. But then also definitely there were several Grimm's Brothers fairy tales that were important to Emily Wilde, and I've always loved the Grimm's Brothers. I have like a very well thumbed through edition from I think the 1950s or something, and so I've read those stories a lot.
Mhm,
One in particular, I think, was probably The Shoemaker and the Elves,
mhm.
which was partly the inspiration for Wendell's character. I don't want to say too much about that because I don't know if we're trying to avoid spoilers here for people that might want to read the book. But yeah, also just I think Rumpelstiltskin has always been one of my favorite fairy tales. There's just something so like for those who haven't read it, but it's basically Rumpelstiltskin is a fairy who can spin straw into gold, and he exchanges his power. He offers up his services to this miller's daughter who gives him a necklace in exchange initially, which of course is just very strange and very silly, to have this character that is so powerful and yet has this desire to kind of serve humanity in some way. And I just love that. And I find that that is actually a really good example of a kind of thread of the absurd that weaves through a lot of fairy tales and a lot of stories of human encounters with the folk. And I really wanted to represent that in Emily Wilde in some way. And so hopefully we can see that coming through in terms of characters like Poe, or even to a certain extent Wendell.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. And Poe was one of my favorite characters.
Oh, good.
He's so cute.
Good. He's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, I audibly was like, "Oh," like, every time he was on the page. It's fantastic.
Good.
Um, and what advice could you pass along to emerging writers who are trying to navigate the publishing industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that sometimes when I see emerging writers talking about publishing, I see a kind of thread of almost despair
Yeah.
weaving through the conversations, which like I get it is hard to
Mhm,
break into the publishing industry, and there are so many hurdles that you have to jump through.
mhm,
It can be kind of a frustrating process. I would say that for me, as someone who took a while to get into the industry and who had to write several books
mhm,
before I was able to produce something that was publishable. I would just say, like, don't necessarily fixate on that first book. It's
mhm,
not necessarily going to be the first book that you write, unfortunately, that is going to get you a publishing deal if that's what you're looking for. Kind of try to take the long view and try to see each book or each story that doesn't necessarily work out in terms of getting a publication credit
mhm,
as just a stepping stone to eventually becoming, you know, someone who can produce a book that publishers will take notice of.
mhm.
Because I think that that's really important. Just not giving up and just keep going, keep writing, and don't view each kind of unsuccessful thing that you write as a failure, but rather as a transition to something better.
Yeah, yeah. Everything, it all teaches you something.
Yes,
Um,
very true.
yeah. And our final, like, fun question that we like to ask everyone who does our video interviews is, do you have any writing rituals, like listening to music, making a tea, lighting a candle, that sort of thing?
Yeah, no candles, but I do usually have a cup of tea at the start of each writing session. And I do like to listen to music, if it's music that I've listened to before, and that can kind of fade into the background. I can sometimes, I like being a bit of a stereotype sometimes and writing in coffee shops. There's just something about a coffee shop setting. Maybe it's just the distance that it puts between me and the things that I have to get done at home. But also just the kind of engagement of being able to people watch a little bit. I really like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I like to have something going on in the background, whether that's the environment of a coffee shop or some kind of music or soundscape or something to keep me going.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. And that was our final question. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us here at Young Adulting today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.